The airplane glided gently across the deep blue sky, carrying hundreds of people with their dreams and hopes. Inside the passenger cabin, the atmosphere was comfortable and peaceful. Everyone believed in a safe, smooth flight. Suddenly, a massive storm hit. The clear sky transformed in an instant into a terrifying pitch-black color. Lightning flashed across the sky, accompanied by the rumble of thunder. The plane was caught in the storm, shaking violently like a leaf in the wind. In the cabin, terror enveloped the passengers. They screamed and clung tightly to one another. Suitcases and bags were thrown about. The cries of children rang out, heart-wrenching. A catastrophic aviation incident had occurred, and amid the panic, teetering on the thin line between life and death, no one could imagine that a seemingly ordinary and simple black man had saved hundreds of lives in an instant. Welcome to our channel, where you'll find emotional and humanitarian stories. Please hit the subscribe button to motivate us to bring you even more touching videos. And now, here is the dramatic story of this simple black man. The crowd of passengers buzzed in the airport waiting area as they hurried toward the boarding gate, dragging their suitcases and holding their tickets. Among those faces, Marcus stood out with his tall stature, dressed neatly, around 40 years old. He walked with a confident stride, his calm demeanor contrasting with the hustle and bustle around him. As Marcus approached the first-class seating area, Linda, a brown-haired flight attendant in a tidy uniform, looked at him with a disdainful gaze, her lips pressed together as if mocking him. "Excuse me, sir. Are you sure you're in the right line? Economy class is over there," Linda said with a self-satisfied smile. Marcus remained silent and handed his ticket to her. She quickly scanned the ticket, her face showing a hint of surprise before reverting to her cold demeanor. She returned the ticket and curtly said, "Have a nice flight, Mr. Marcus." As the service continued, the atmosphere in first class became heavy and tense. Linda's voice stood out as she chatted amiably with other passengers, displaying a distinct friendliness that was in stark contrast to her dismissive and even hostile attitude toward Marcus. An older woman sitting a few rows behind Marcus leaned in to her husband and whispered, "The way she's treating him is shameful." Her husband nodded, his frustrated expression revealing his discontent. "Someone should speak up," he said, glancing at Marcus as if to encourage him. A businessman sitting near the front of the cabin felt uncomfortable witnessing the scene and tried to focus on his laptop screen, but he was clearly distracted by the tension in the air. As Linda walked down the aisle, pouring drinks and serving snacks to passengers, she stopped beside a well-dressed middle-aged woman who exuded elegance. "How may I assist you, ma'am?" she asked, her sweet tone laced with sarcasm. The woman glanced toward Marcus with a hint of hesitation before turning back to Linda and quietly replied, "No, thank you." However, her gaze lingered on Marcus, as if contemplating the injustice unfolding. Linda seized the opportunity to display her contempt. She leaned in, lowering her voice but still loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Do they now hand out first-class seats to anyone who wins a charity lottery?" The remark came with her sneering smile and a dismissive nod toward Marcus, making the atmosphere in the cabin even more suffocating and uncomfortable. Everyone around felt anger, but only a few glanced at Marcus with sympathy as he endured this unfair treatment. The woman's eyes widened in shock, but before she could react, Linda turned and walked away, leaving a heavy atmosphere in the cabin. Marcus, taking a sip of water, nearly choked when he heard Linda's comment. He set the cup down and clenched his jaw to keep calm. Marcus had experienced discrimination before, but it was rarely so overt, and certainly never at 10,000 feet, where there was no escape. No one in the cabin knew that in his carry-on bag was a pilot's license, a symbol of years of effort and sacrifice. Marcus closed his eyes, allowing memories to flood back. The long nights of studying, hours spent in simulators, and the excitement and pride of flying solo for the first time. Those feelings resurfaced, rekindling the burning passion and desire for freedom that came with being a pilot. The image of his father, who had worked tirelessly to support his son's dreams, flashed in Marcus's mind. He had said that the sky was not just a place to fly, but also a place to prove oneself. With each moment of recollection, Marcus felt more determined not to let this discrimination shape how he saw himself. When he opened his eyes, his resolute gaze locked onto Linda's face, who was still smugly satisfied with her actions. Marcus took a deep breath, realizing that his responsibility was not only to fly the plane but also to reflect the values he had always believed in. Despite the difficulty, he was determined not to let this pain affect his self-respect. At the same time, a thought sparked in his mind. Discrimination was not just a personal challenge, but an opportunity to change how others perceived each other in society. Marcus vowed to fight not only for himself but for all those who had been treated unfairly. He was ready to turn these moments into motivation, to prove that a person's ability should never be limited by skin color or prejudice. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. But in first class, the atmosphere began to feel suffocating. As Linda walked by, Marcus could no longer contain his emotions. "What do you think you're doing?" Marcus spoke up, trying to keep his tone light but unable to hide his frustration. "How have you treated me? That's not how a flight attendant should behave." Linda turned around, her gaze icy. "Oh, don't exaggerate. It was just a joke. Maybe you need to learn how to accept the truth." "The truth?" Marcus said, surprised, raising an eyebrow. "You think discrimination is the truth? No one should be treated like that, regardless of their skin color or circumstances." Linda scoffed, placing her hands on her hips. "If you want to be respected, prove that you deserve it. Who do you think you are? You're just a passenger." "That's not what's important," Marcus snapped, his eyes locked on her. "But the way you behave shows your narrow-mindedness and ignorance. I don't need your acknowledgement. I'm proud of who I am." Linda leaned in, her expression disdainful. "Proud? Do you have any idea how many people are around you? They all see that you don't belong here. If you want respect, stand up and prove it." Marcus felt the blood boil in his veins. Respect isn't something to prove, it's something that should be given. I don't need to do anything to deserve it because I've worked hard to be here. What needs to change is the way you view others. Linda laughed defiantly. "Well, good for you. But don't expect me to respect someone I see as nothing special. And don't expect me to stay silent while witnessing discrimination," Marcus said, his voice strong. "I won't sit back and let you belittle me or anyone else. Change starts with people like you. You can change how you treat others." They stood facing each other, the tense atmosphere spreading throughout the cabin as other passengers turned their gazes toward them, whispering about the heated argument. Just as the confrontation between Marcus and Linda reached its peak, the sky outside suddenly darkened, black clouds engulfing the airplane. A storm unexpectedly struck, powerful winds causing the aircraft to shake violently. The lights in the cabin flickered, and the engine screamed eerily. Passengers began to scream, the cries of children ringing out in panic. A woman clutched her husband's hand, her eyes wide with fear, while an elderly man beside them murmured prayers, his hands trembling. "Oh God, please help us," he exclaimed, his voice filled with desperation. Marcus felt his seat shake violently, his heart tightening as he looked around. They had left the ground and now they were like a ship in a stormy ocean, uncertain of their fate. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from the cockpit, like something shattering, accompanied by the pilot's voice coming through the radio. "We have a problem. The control system is failing. All passengers, please remain calm." Linda, despite her previous anger, now looked pale. She turned around, no longer exuding the arrogance from before. "We need to do something," she shouted, her voice trembling, lacking any confidence. Marcus clenched the armrest of his seat, trying to stay calm. "We have to follow the crew's instructions," he said, attempting to reassure both himself and the passengers. "They are trained to handle this situation." The engine's roar grew louder and the airplane seemed to be tossing them from their seats. A strong jolt caused everyone to scream in terror, and Marcus felt himself being drawn into the chaos unfolding around him. "Please sit down and fasten your seatbelts." A voice blared over the intercom, but those around him seemed to no longer hear anything. The rows of seats in front were pushed backward, causing a young man to fall to the floor, screaming in fear. The sounds of crying, praying, and cursing blended into a symphony of despair. Marcus looked at Linda, seeing that her gaze was no longer one of disdain, but rather filled with fear and pleading. I don't know what's going to happen," she exclaimed, her face ashen. Marcus felt a tremendous pressure, and in that moment, everything seemed to spiral out of control. He clenched his fists, determined not to let panic win. "We have to survive," he whispered, despite his heart racing with worry. "Together we can get through this." The engine roared again, but this time it was a fierce growl, and a violent jolt sent everyone inside soaring into the air. They felt swept up in the raging storm, and Marcus knew that now was the decisive moment. The line between life and death had never been more tenuous as the fierce storm battered the plane. The howling wind outside and the intense turbulence made passengers scream in panic, while the cries of children echoed like desperate pleas for help. Suddenly, the co-pilot yelled over the intercom, "The captain has passed out. We can't control the plane." Panic surged in the cabin as people looked at each other with terrified eyes, unsure of what would happen next. Marcus, standing in the midst of the crowd, felt the despair and anxiety enveloping him. Suddenly, he shouted, "I'm a pilot. Let me take over for the captain." All eyes turned to him, shock rippling through the cabin. Linda stood nearby, unable to believe what she had just heard, her brow furrowed with skepticism. "Are you sure? Who are you?" she asked, her voice full of doubt. The passengers around them also looked anxious, whispering among themselves, uncertain if Marcus was truly capable of flying the plane in this emergency situation. But in that tense moment, the co-pilot, with a face full of anxiety, looked at Marcus and nodded. "We don't have time to argue. Get to the cockpit, hurry." Marcus and the co-pilot rushed toward the cockpit door. As fierce winds caused the plane to sway violently, they opened the door and stepped into the cramped space of the cockpit, where every decision and action would now determine the fate of hundreds of passengers. After a moment of coordinated effort, Marcus and the co-pilot regained control of the plane, stabilized the situation, and requested an emergency landing. When the aircraft landed safely, applause erupted throughout the cabin like a wave of excitement and gratitude. Passengers from the young to the elderly stood up together, clapping to congratulate Marcus and the co-pilot. The atmosphere in the plane was filled with joy and relief, as if the entire world had just escaped a nightmare. Immediately after landing, information about Marcus quickly spread on social media. People discovered that he was not just an ordinary passenger, but also an accomplished pilot with thousands of flight hours. Photos of him in his pilot uniform, along with the touching story of his courage and determination, became the center of attention for everyone. Linda, standing amidst the crowd, felt embarrassed as she witnessed the accolades Marcus received. She approached him, her eyes full of regret. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she said, her voice sincere. "I was wrong to judge you by appearances. I didn't know who you were, and I had an unwarranted prejudice. Thank you for saving all of us." Marcus looked at her, no longer angry or resentful. He simply nodded and said, "We all learn from our mistakes. What matters is that we face this challenge together." This encounter not only opened a new chapter in Marcus's life, but also served as a great lesson for everyone about respect and unity. Although he received warm congratulations from the passengers and recognition from the community, Marcus felt a heavy burden in his heart. After entering the cockpit and working with the co-pilot to handle the emergency, he discovered a shocking secret. The captain had failed to follow several necessary safety procedures before takeoff. At that moment, a fierce internal struggle unfolded in Marcus's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about whether he should speak out about the truth. If he did, it could have serious repercussions for the captain's career. Moreover, revealing the shortcomings of someone who had once been a colleague would raise doubts about the airline's safety. But if he stayed silent, would this injustice continue and potentially endanger passengers in the future? Fortunately, the decision was made unexpectedly. When the captain regained consciousness after his fainting spell, he proactively admitted his mistakes to everyone. With a heavy voice, he acknowledged that he had not followed several safety procedures, and that this had directly led to a serious incident on the flight. He decided to resign, accepting responsibility for his actions. Hearing those confessions, Marcus felt a sense of relief. Although the burden in his heart had not completely disappeared, at least he now knew that the truth had been acknowledged. The captain's courageous act not only freed Marcus from his psychological burden, but also opened the door for a safer working environment in the future. After the dramatic incident, Marcus became a hero in the eyes of many passengers and airline staff. To recognize his efforts in saving lives, the airline's management decided to offer Marcus a new position, where he could participate in training and safety development. However, Marcus declined the offer. "Thank you for your trust," Marcus said in a deep but firm voice, "but I want to continue being a pilot. It is my dream and my parents' dream. They dedicated their lives to support me in pursuing this passion. I cannot give up what I love most just because of an unfortunate incident." In that moment, Marcus's eyes sparkled with determination. He knew that continuing to fly was not just a job, it was a way to honor his family's efforts and sacrifices. Each flight was not only a journey through the skies, but also a part of the legacy he wanted to build. And I also want to contribute to ensuring that accidents like this never happen again, he added. By becoming a better pilot, I can set an example for the next generation and provide safety for passengers. The management couldn't help but admire Marcus's determination. They understood that people like him were exactly what the aviation industry needed, individuals who not only possessed skills but also had heart and courage. Ultimately, Marcus returned to the skies, flying the planes he loved with confidence and a sense of responsibility. In the end, Marcus's story was not just a journey from discrimination to bravery and resilience. It was also a powerful message about the value of humanity. Every individual, regardless of skin color or background, has the right to be respected and evaluated based on their abilities and efforts. Racism is not only a form of mental violence but also undermines a person's potential. Marcus proved that even in difficult circumstances we can stand up and assert ourselves, overcoming all barriers to demonstrate our worth.